Simon, you there?
Hello. Oh, great, thank you. Thanks, Wen Choi. And it's a pleasure to have our three roundtable participants here. I was looking through their bios, really impressed with the kind of work that you've done already, despite being just undergraduates or master's students. And what we're going to do today is we've already been having a small discussion. You guys have met before to talk a little bit about this, and we've also been talking via the email. So each of them is going to tell you a little bit about what they do and the kind of experiences they've had. We'll start with Wei Fen, and then Ping, and then Christina. And once they've each had said their little piece, they've also prepared some questions for each other, and we'll take off from that to kick off the roundtable discussion. I like to take my notes in graphical form, so today I was saying to Wing Choi, I might try doing it on the whiteboard, but please don't focus on my notes on the whiteboard. It's just to help us really see if there's any connections between what they're talking about and try and take the discussion forward by having some visual notes to refer to. But really the focus is on what they're saying. If I'm trying to moderate them and I give up taking the notes, don't worry about it. It's just to take it instead of me just writing here, to do it on the whiteboard, so it might help the rest of us also try and think about the whole discussion and where all this is going. So what I've already done on the board is to write down some points from what Wing Choi, the description for the conference today and what he introduced right at the start. But so, okay, enough from me. Let's go straight into hearing from the three of them, and let's start with Wei Fen.
Okay, so I'll just start with a brief introduction of myself and my position vis-a-vis the topic, and some preliminary thoughts and questions I had about it when approaching this topic with Christina and Ping. First of all, I'm currently doing my master's in the South Asian Studies Department of NUS, which is in itself already a...
I think speak closer to the mic.
Okay, which is already a interdisciplinary department. My own background is of having a minor in English literature, so I've always sort of straddled these different worlds. And in terms of my involvement with the arts, it would then mean that it seems pretty divergent in some ways. I co-edit a literary magazine called Ceriph with a few other young writers, and it's meant to promote the works of emerging writers in Singapore. So that's one thing I do. And then the other thing is, as someone who is both a student as well as starting to tutor in the university, trying to make use and tap on artistic resources to bring across a clearer message of historical narratives and statistics in some ways in relation to the South Asian culture. So yeah, one thing that came to mind then is that talking about the arts and different artistic practices as a dialogue, it's interesting that then when I think about my own practices, I feel almost immediately uneasy thinking about these practices separately. And why is that so? In terms of why these different disciplines almost seem like they don't speak to each other, which I think then makes this more interesting because we're going to speak across visual arts as well as theatre. The second thing I have observed is that as a university student, as an undergraduate that tried to organize events that both, okay, I'll give one example. For example, I tried to organize a South Asian queer film screening across a month, 3 different screenings, and sort of expected that the main people that would turn up would be from the South Asian Studies Department as well as the English Literature Department. It turned out to not be the case at all, and the lit students mostly said, oh, we don't really want to come here at 6 o'clock because it feels like another tutorial, having to watch a film and then have this intense discussion about it after. The South Asian students all said, oh, we've already watched these films, we don't really want to sit down and talk. So the people that did turn up were actually people from all sorts of other disciplines that had the time maybe and were not satiated by these artistic information within their own departments. So that was one interesting thing, which then made me think about my own experience in undergrad and whether, how I began exploring my academic interests outside of the classroom. And I think one big thing that came up was perhaps the presence or the lack of presence of role models in terms of academic staff. So I remember very vividly taking this class about Southeast Asian literature under Philip Holden in NUS, and he actively encouraged students to, go out and he would email us when there were talks by Tash Al, for example, who is the author of a lit tech that we were discussing in class, and he'd say, well, this is happening at the Arts House, go out and listen and ask some questions. And people did that, but unfortunately out of 4 years, that was the only time this actually ever happened in terms of academic guidance or staff sort of leading or guiding students to say, well, step out of these other things outside of the university are happening that are related to what we've been discussing. So now as a South Asian tutor, I try to do the same. It's then interesting to sort of feel the resistance from students, sort of going, well, does this matter if I'm not going to get graded for it? And that's one interesting to think about in terms of how the university sort of sets up indices of merit and, yeah, for students in terms of how they perceive their interest or how they might go about pursuing it.
Thanks very much, Wei Fen. Let's move on to Ping and hear what you have to say.
Hi. Okay, hi, I'm Ping. Just brief introduction to myself. I am the producer and creator of Takeoff Productions. We are one of the many, I think, small amateur independent theatre groups that are made up largely of university students. I was actually very, very surprised when they asked me to come and participate in the roundtable at the conference, because they said the topic was on university and the arts, and I was like, wait a minute, my entire experience with the arts has really taken place outside the university over the past 2 to 3 years, and despite the fact that many of the people that I work with are in university, including myself, why haven't we we know that the universities have their own arts-based theatre groups or other performing arts groups, so why do we sort of feel this need, this compulsion to move out and do it independently? Concurrent with this sort of underlying sentiment, I've noticed also that there's been a proliferation of independent theatre groups. When I first started Takeoff about 2 to 3 years ago and we did a show, we felt very much alone and we didn't really have anybody else we could turn to it for sort of advice or input on what it takes, so a lot of it was sort of working from scratch. Over the past 2 years, there have been many, many theatre groups. I mean, in the coming months alone, I know of at least 4 or 5 independent young theatre groups who are putting up different performances. And I think we often describe things as a movement only with the benefit of hindsight. But if I stopped and I pause and I reflect over the momentum that's been gaining in the amateur youth theatre scene over the past 2 years, I do think that we are in the midst of sort of a movement on intensification and really growth in local young Singapore theatre, which is very interesting for me. So really what I've been thinking about is there are so many of us in university who are doing these things outside the university, and what Wing Choi has said in his introduction is, why isn't there a greater entanglement between our creation of art outside university with the university? Why is it so disparate? And that forced me to examine my own prejudices as to why I do what it is I do, as well as ask a couple of people how they felt. And it pains me a bit to say this. I do feel that it is a difficult thing to say, that there is a certain bias or assumption or fear that if you do art within the university, that there is certain entrenched kind of institutional preferences or prejudices that would constrain what you could do with art. And we made art because we had a very distinctive idea that there was something that we wanted, the kind of art that we wanted to do or kind of work that we were interested in. And we felt that if we did it within the university setting or tried to do it with a uni-based theatre group, that the institution just wouldn't let us. And I don't know whether this is related to a bit to what Wei Fen has said, that in university we're used to an environment where there are sort of indices of what is acceptable, and we're used to being graded according to the preferences of an instructor, and we feel like these biases will still be present as limitations within the university. And I'd really be interested in hearing later from Wei Fen and Christina whether this is something that is unique to theatre or whether it's something that's shared across other art forms. first thing that friend pointed out to me yesterday is for us, early on with Charlene, they talked about the community and the industry, and for us, now we are a community of young theatre artists, but as far as the industry is concerned, we feel as if we put up independent work. It's a way of sort of creating a bridge into the industry, so you no longer want to be trapped within that university setting. The university is a very protected environment, and it serves a valuable purpose. You are guaranteed a certain audience, your friends, people will pay for it, there is a venue, resources are provided. Whereas if you do it independently, you have to make it work. And in a way it feels like it's a sort of public debut, and that if you can step outside the confines of the university, then you manage to prove yourself in some way. So those are just my thoughts about theatre and its relationship really to the university, and questions around why aren't they more connected, and should they be more connected, or is this sort of separation something that should be preserved?
Thanks very much, Ping. And let's move on to Christina.
I'm Christina, and I'm just gonna follow like Charlene and read off the script. Cop out. Well, I work at a gallery at Gillman Barracks. I reside there most days when I'm not on the university campus. I read English literature at NUS. But that's not where I started off when I came into our somewhat still relatively small contemporary art corner here in Singapore. In fact, I started here at the Substation, visiting shows and writing for a publication for which discussion meetings were held in the rooms just upstairs. That was 2008 and I was 18. Since then I put on art reviews and co-edited subsequent publications, and most recently I managed a talks and art outreach event at Art Stage Singapore. But while my own writing is on hiatus, I do put in the bi-monthly press release for a number of Asian artists my gallery represents. But to step back a bit, I didn't have my first encounter with the arts at the university, but further before and prior to it, at the pre-university, the junior high or junior college. But then, it was my art class, and we would spend 3 hours watching documentaries of Joseph Beuys. And once in the summer, they provided us the opportunity to visit the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and we saw his unfathomable work, Flight. So I wouldn't speculate on whether student apathy is more and more entrenched the longer one stays in school, but it must have been pretty difficult to get high schoolers to care about anything, let alone piano and felt installations. Still, I was very impressed. And what I'm getting at is, regardless of the depths of apathy we must acknowledge reside in most young people today, there have to be some encounters in which interest is shaped and evolved. And it may indeed be up to the high school, the university, the institution, to simply set up these encounters. And I think the rest, with a smile I would say, is serendipity. But I don't know yet if the question should rightly be phrased as, what more can the university do? And speaking of high school, Melanie Polcock, who's in the audience, she dragged me out last night to see a French film called Dans la Maison, or In the House. I do recommend it. The protagonist is a literature teacher, desperately trying to inspire his students to read and write after the French greats, Flaubert, the school's very namesake, and Hugo, and so on. Sometimes it is up to that one teacher, like Wei Fen says, you know, the academic pull of just Philip Holden, right? And that one mentor to toss the student in the back a couple of books to open up his or her access. And really, books are so essential. We're all thankful for books, actually. There's a big shout out. But I am consciously dropping out the names of a lot of heavyweights, from Beuys to Hugo. I would say that one of the most dire deficiencies of the young person's experience of culture is his lack of real dimensions, It wouldn't be a stretch to say that this is only exaggerated in Singaporean institutions where efficiency, we talked about efficiency, is too often prioritized over profundity or even spirituality, as Shani says. Wei Fen noted in our previous meeting that we don't even read books anymore, we just photocopy them. And it's pretty true. And even outside the bounds of the university, with the already and always lazy internet culture, it becomes a sufficient badge of acculturation to retweet or reblog so-and-so literary figure or it artist. And so between the poles of hyper-efficiency and uber apathy, there stands your average university student. It sounds like a tough fight. But on to aspirations. And this is where I think it's the real game changer. For one thing, my own high school trip to London and Paris that year, we went to the Tate Modern, the Louvre, and so on. It really broadened my own aspirations. It opened up my world to be in the major museum. And I think travel is a major part of it. And I want to pose this question primarily to Wei Fen because I know she travels so often and well. And perhaps I was thinking of Host, your recent publication that she co-edited with Darren Xiao. And would you like to say anything about this?
Please go ahead. Please jump into and answer each other and have a discussion.
Okay, sure. Yeah, definitely. I think travel outside of Singapore and how they inform our views of arts, community, institutions is a big factor. And I mean, with COAS it's interesting because I actually did that whole project away from Singapore, so I was online in Bangladesh every morning, communicating with Darren and sort of emailing back and forth. And I guess in a way that really fit the project and its notions of peripheries, moving with boundaries and things like that. The other thing I think mostly though with traveling outside of Singapore is that you sort of lose this sense of yourself tied to an institutional or a state identity. And for example with Ceriph, I was actually sort of born as an idea when I wasn't in Singapore, and I was in Portland walking around, and I sort of entered this zine shop which was full of handmade erotic lit magazines, and it was great. And it almost felt like there were just these people doing things they were interested in without really any desire for affirmation from any institution or from any state. And I was emailing my friend Winnie about it, and she was in Japan at that point, where there's also sort of a very big independent zine culture. And then the idea for Ceriph was born out of that. And I think we sort of almost had to be outside of this space and outside of our, NUS, NTU, whatever identities to even begin imagining a project like that. Yeah. I don't know if that is to answer.
I know you all have questions for each other, so yeah.
Do you want to talk about travel in relation to
I was thinking also about how you mentioned students were they students? They were just young people setting up shop.
Oh, right. I don't know if they were students.
Yeah.
No idea who they were.
Where can you place it? At which point does interest start to form? Real interest, like courts, facets. And is it, like for me, it was at the high school. Where was it for you then?
I think it would wow, really long time. I think it was in kindergarten. When I first did theatre. But and I just kept doing it, and I think actually my experience with the pre-university, like junior college, did make a huge difference because I took theatre studies there, and I was in class there, and so I think that's when it went from something that we just did because it was fun and something that we consciously kind of decided that, this was part of our identity and something that we had to do, that we were going to commit to it personally. And I don't know, do you think, you're talking about creating encounters within the university, I think maybe that is something that's unique to institutions and schools, that they put you in a position where you have to think about these things.
And maybe more so for something like theatre where it would involve sort of a group group effort. Because I feel like with something like lit, like you said, everything begins from reading, and you kind of start that when you're really young. In your own way, it's really easy, then very low barriers to entry. Just go to the library and pick up a book and start from there. And in fact, if anything, I think the classroom was almost acted almost as a foe to that, because I remember just reading under the desk and getting caught. Yeah, in relation to the university though, yeah, so one thing that I mentioned again was, maybe thinking in terms of workload and whether students are perhaps overloaded in that sense. If you have to be reading 5 books a week for 5 modules, you really don't want to spend an extra 1, 2, 3 hours after class discussing outside of class.
Reading the news.
Yeah, reading these things. Yeah, you just can't do that. So that's a very, I guess, very practical reason. Yeah.
I mean, that is also a condition of what you mentioned. The university being very pigeonholed in the end. At the end of the day, it just generates its own momentum, and it doesn't really move outward.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think Ping had a question as well about why, what was it? Whether the association with the university actually has any effect on this perception of limiting freedom of artistic exploration, right? Is that like that?
Yeah, it's not like a hard limit, like we're going to censor you. In fact, if you do a production under University of Sweden, you don't have to apply for licenses. But more to do with the fact that this is this belief or mentality that when I'm in a school, right, you can't do certain things. So you're constrained from doing certain things. Why is that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, with Ceriph was of a very practical reason. When he's from NTU and I was from NUS, and obviously we were not going to be able to do any joint thing under any of these institutions and be fully represented. But thinking about that in relation to maybe journals like Singer, which was from NUS back in the day, and then the current NUS Lit Society magazine called Symbol. And yeah, I do think that when we did start with Ceriph, we were very consciously also trying to move away from the Singer model, where it was sort of the same people within the same department writing to each other and having this dialogue in a smaller space, a more confined space. And something with Ceriph that was really great for us was just sort of opening that up and people emailing us, NS men, boarding camp, all the doctors who always had this passion to write and never really got around to doing it. And in that way, it sort of broadened everything, and I think that really helped not being part of this institution. The interesting thing with Symbol, which is I think quite a new lit magazine, started maybe a year and a half ago, is that the editors are all not from the lit department at all. So it's 3 students, if I'm not wrong, all of whom are in NUS, but none of whom are actually lit majors. And I was wondering why. What are the lit majors doing, or what are they not interested in? Why are they not interested in this? They're too busy in the visual arts. Yeah, but I mean, that was something I just started thinking about last night actually. I was looking through Symbol. And yeah.
Right. Do you feel like though that how do resources like influence that?
Yeah, so I guess the other thing I wanted to say in relation to that is that sure there are limitations to artistic expression within the confines of academic institutions, but as we're talking about the art community versus the art industry, I think there are also limitations out there. I mean, just in terms of who you're going to get funding from and the sort of restrictions that they then impose on you. For example, which no, naming names, but I mean right now we with Ceriph we worked with books actually for a while, and then now we're working with NEC. So of course on both fronts there are going to be different sort of expectations, different sort of people you work with, and that definitely shapes the creative content that comes out there. So I mean I think that yes, it's true that we sort of think about academic institutions and think immediately, oh, it's going to be really restrictive, but once having stepped away from that, it's everywhere, and I guess it's sort of learning how to sidestep it.
I think that it's really funny how how young people are able to be very resourceful if you just throw us out there. We're not actually as lazy, incompetent, creepy as you think we are. We're very good at Facebook. But I mean, like what you say, finding the resources, finding the funding is a big question. But for me, an even a larger hurdle is also just the dearth of interest before you can even start to take off the list. And it's also it's practically free to visit any galleries. But and you mentioned about finances. I've never bought any work, and there's no expectation to buy any work. But if you look at the average gallery opening, how many students attend?
One of my questions to Christina was actually about how important or necessary she thinks formal education is in terms of students being able to appreciate, understand, be attracted to this realm of visual art, and whether financial restrictions actually play a part in that in terms of the world of visual art being something that's I guess instinctively seems to be pulled towards this idea of patronage, where after you start viewing art, you're going to start wanting to buy it.
Hopefully. But I think I would have to say that my arena is a step behind yours, because there isn't even an arts department, fine art or visual art department in the National University, and it's just starting up at NTU. But like even a minor general module that CCA Talks offered called Reading Visual Images does actually give you the very basic tools, equip you to even look at paintings from Monet to Chinese ink. It would be useful, and I would say it does provide the first link.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking about that in relation to the lit department and my experience with it, in the sense that formal education doesn't actually translate to active interest outside of the classroom. So I don't know, do you think that's just a disciplinary thing, or would it be different if we actually did have formal education?
This is what I find it's a huge contradiction about young people today, because I would say that our generation is probably the most visual in terms of past generations, like so visually saturated, like Tumblr and so on. We have images all around us, Instagram, all the time. But when you ask them to look at the visual arts, it's just there's a disconnect, and it's a question that is beyond me, it's beyond my years.
If I might just jump in there and take up from what you've been saying, I think some of you talked about that first moment where you encountered the arts and got hooked, and now you're talking about how do you get other people in the university, your classmates and colleagues, to make that leap beyond the formal learning in the classroom, if they ever get the chance to have any, to having their own interest in the arts and pursuing them outside that formal setting, the kind of informal education or exposure. I don't know if it's worthwhile to think about that moment when each of you encountered the arts, and what was it about that moment that hooked you, that made it special for you? How can we recreate that moment for everybody else? I don't know if that works. I mean, could it be that our three speakers here today are particularly special, that it only worked for you and your friends who are involved in arts, or is it something that experience can be replicated for everybody else? I don't know if that's something that's worth